My name is Carol He, and it's my privilege to kick off the event tonight on behalf of the many sponsors across campus that have all took together to make this symposium the interesting event that it is. As you already know, the sustainability challenges that our world faces really demand cross-campus, cross-sectoral, cross-boundary partnerships to find solutions. So we're happy that the symposium includes not only the Business School and our Center for Sustainable Enterprise, but our Global Business Center, recognizing that the problems we face are global and local. So Keynote Flagler's Global Business Center is a prime driver behind the symposium, as well as the Institute for the Environment and regional study centers across campus, including the Center for European Studies, the Center for Eastern European and Slavic Studies, the Center for Asian Studies, the Center for African Studies, and the Department of City and Regional Planning. So this last group is partnering with us for the first time this year, the Department of City and Regional Planning, because our focus this year is on communities and the question of what makes communities regions that thrive, places where people, economies, businesses can flourish. So it's an honor tonight to have Daniel Brook with us, who wrote the most interesting book called A History of Future Cities. So we're grateful that he's made the trek here to share some insights really focused on some global megacities that were constructed with the future in mind. So Mumbai, Shanghai, Dubai, and St. Petersburg. So I will give a brief introduction of Daniel Brook, our keynote, who will also be available to sign books after this event, and also tell you a bit about the roundtable experts that will be in a discussion after Daniel's presentation. So to introduce Daniel Brook, you already know that he has wrote this best-selling book, A History of Future Cities. He's also a journalist and has a lot of articles in outlets that you're probably familiar with, like Harper's and Foreign Policy Magazine and Slate. His architectural writing has won him the 2010 Winterhouse Award for Design, Writing, and Criticism. And in the work leading up to his writing, The History of Future Cities, he lived for a month each in those different cities and conducted archival research and did a semester-long fellowship at the Library of Congress. He's originally from New York and is educated at Yale and lives now in New Orleans. So it's a delight to have you in our town of Chapel Hill. Daniel Brook had the privilege today of getting a tour of Durham by one of our other speakers, Matt Popovich, who will share with us a local perspective on this question of what makes a thriving community. So even though we're in Chapel Hill, we like to have a basketball rivalry with the folks down the road in Durham. Durham is a place where people... Oh, when you went to the right. Daisy, you're a Tar Heel fan. And lots of Tar Heels are fans of Durham because it's a fun place to live, it's a fun place to go out for events, and it's a fun place to work. So Matt, as the Chief Operating Officer of Downtown Durham, Inc., has played a vital role in the revitalization of Durham. He has been with the organization since 2004, and before joining DDI, he worked as a business and computer consultant in the Triangle area and at UNC-Chapel Hill. Prior to that, he interned at the marketing department with the Charlotte Hornets. He has been a guest columnist as well at 1551 Magazine and the Herald Sun, in addition to being a contributor to some national publications like the National Real Estate Investor Magazine. More recently, he has helped gain national attention for the startup culture in downtown Durham. He has partnered on initiatives including the Startup Stampede and the SM Office, or SMOFfice. I was afraid to say SMOFfice. I should have asked. Which has actually not something to laugh at, we're really proud of, because it just got an Unconventional Chamber Project Award. So it won a global award the most unconventional chamber project in the world by the World Chambers of Commerce. So very impressive recognition for his work here in Durham. We also have with us Cor Rademaker. He has joined us from the Netherlands. He has worked in planning and design and focuses on sustainable and social development. His company is called STRATEQ. So throughout the years, he's been involved in over 80% of the urban planning in the Netherlands. So he brings to us deep experience in that area, as well as having collaborated with many universities, such as the Hague University's program on innovative entrepreneurship, and the Technical University in Delft on a project to create a green campus. So that's certainly an area of interest here at UNC. His company, STRATEQ, is involved in diverse smart city projects, not only in the Netherlands, in cities such as Rotterdam, Amsterdam, and The Hague, but also in Rio de Janeiro. And the focus is always on creating social, new energy, transportation, and economical smart grid solutions. So as that, as an introduction to all of the wonderful panelists you'll hear from tonight, I would like to again thank you for coming out to share this evening with us. And now I'll hand the floor over to our keynote, Daniel Brook. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for that very generous introduction. In fact, so generous, she put me on the bestseller list for the first time. Thank you. It can be a bestseller in Chapel Hill tonight if y'all will do your part. It's a real honor to be invited here with all these distinguished panelists. In particular, Matthew, who gave me a tour of downtown Durham this afternoon, so I got to see a little bit of what's going on in this region of the country. And you're all very fortunate to live here, as I'm sure you already know. My book is called The History of Future Cities. What does that mean? It looks at the future by looking at the past. It takes a series of what you could think of as case studies, historic cities of St. Petersburg, Russia, Shanghai, China, and Bombay, India, now called Mumbai, and argues that they were precociously modern. We can think of them as dress rehearsals for the 21st century. They were all places that were cosmopolitan before most cities in the world. They're all places that had people from all over the world and ideas from all over the world and architectural and urban structures from all over the world imposed on them or self-imposed on them before it became common. I mean, today it would be normal to go to a shopping mall in Bangalore or a gated community in Chengdu. In the 1700s and then the 1800s, there were only a few places that were getting urban forms from all over the world dropped down upon them, and these are the places I'm focusing on. And for my lecture tonight, I want to look at these urban structures and architectural styles that are dropped down upon these cities as what we would now think of as best practices. Things that were seen somewhere else and then imported to a new place, where they succeeded or failed, or in some of the most interesting cases sort of failed until they succeeded when they were somehow tweaked by the local population. I'm mostly going to be looking at Shanghai and Bombay because I think they fit this they fit this structure the best of the places, but there will be a little bit of St. Petersburg and a little bit of Dubai. And I want to move through the general structure of the book and then pivot from the end of the book where I look forward into where we're going today. I mean, historically, these forms are generally dropped down from the west upon the east. And now, in the world we're entering, in this Asian century, we have more equal exchange, which is something I see a lot of hope in. At the same time, I think some of the mistakes you'll see from history are being made again in terms of just dropping things down that are inappropriate, or just because something works somewhere doesn't mean it necessarily works somewhere else. So I hope as we move through my slides, which they're just photographs that I took, or some are historic photographs or documents, I can explain the general movement of things. So here we start. Wait, I said I was, this guy said he was going to talk about St. Petersburg and Dubai and Bombay and Shanghai, and now he has this slide of Amsterdam. What's going on? Well, my book starts in Amsterdam, because that's where the story starts. Peter the Great of Russia takes a secret journey to Western Europe. This is before Russia has opened up to the world. And he's so taken with Amsterdam, which is at that point the hub of the global trading system. It's incredibly wealthy. The streets are buzzing, the canals are flooded with goods and merchants. And he decides the way he's going to bring Russia into the modern world is by building himself his own private Amsterdam. St. Petersburg. He takes over this river delta, conquers it from the Swedes, and has it serves big canals, so it looks just like Amsterdam. And he's decided that the Dutch are worldly and modern because they all know how to sail. They can all navigate the canals. They have to understand the science of meteorology and wind power and navigation. So he decrees that there will be no bridges built in St. Petersburg, and everyone will have to get around by boat. If you know anything about the geography of Northern Europe, the canals in St. Petersburg are frozen much more of the year than the canals of Amsterdam are frozen. And the river delta silts up, and this plan crashes and burns. This is a best practice for Amsterdam, and it's not a best practice for St. Petersburg. And eventually, bridges are built, and it's still a very beautiful city, but the canals are largely decorative in a way that, historically at least, the canals of Amsterdam were not. They were practical. They would actually bring the boats up to the docks and load them with goods. Peter the Great is so enamored of Amsterdam that he wants a brick house, red brick house. So he doesn't have the wherewithal to manufacture bricks, so he paints his cabin with red brick structure. And yeah, I think it's good that you're laughing. The real question is, how can Russia be modern in its own way, not how can Russia simply copy a Western city that's very successful. We see the same thing happening today. This is the twin Chrysler buildings of Dubai. If New York has one Chrysler building, Dubai can have two. And if Houston can have 12 lanes, Dubai can have 18 lanes. Again, you have this repetition of something that ostensibly is working in a rich city like New York or a rich city like Houston, and then Dubai will do it bigger and better. Double it. Now we start at the beginning of Shanghai's history. Shanghai is colonized by the British, French, and Americans. America has an actual colony in Shanghai that most Americans don't know about, that I didn't know about until I started writing the book. That's 1842 to about the US Civil War, and at that point it merges with the British colony. And the Western powers rebuild this riverfront in Shanghai to look like a Western city. Some of these brands could be in Chapel Hill. The only Chinese-looking building is this customs house pagoda. Everything else was built in this Western style. This is the Shanghai American School. Looks like a prep school. It could be here. I usually say in Boston or Philadelphia, but it could be in North Carolina. Each of the foreign communities builds their own little city there, and then this is an American real estate developer built this in the 1920s. This is in Shanghai. Looks like it could be on the street in San Francisco. But this is an American company doing business in Shanghai in the 1870s. Getz Brothers department store from San Francisco. If you want your Levi's jeans or your Heinz ketchup, in 1870 Shanghai, you go to Getz Brothers. So this foreign world is sort of dropped down upon the Chinese, upon what becomes the biggest city in China and the fastest growing city on earth by the 1860s. And yet, the Chinese, after having this sort of dropped upon them, begin to shape it in their own ways. So these are two department stores, St. Cyr and Wing On, and they're run by Chinese families. They're not run by the Getz brothers. They're not run by expatriate Americans or Brits. There was also a British department store. And you see, of course, the architecture they borrow a lot of elements from the West, but they also have this, for example, you see the lightning bolts here, and these Chinese characters. At night, those would be lit up. And this is the roots of this form of urbanism we think of as quintessentially East Asian, the sort of flashing lights, and we usually associate it more with Tokyo or Seoul than we do with China, because in the Maoist period they cut off all the lights for a long time. But you see here already there's beginning to be a kind of urbanistic language of Shanghai that's not simply a copying of the West. You have things like, this is it's called a Lilong. This is a hybrid kind of housing that was sort of mass housing in Shanghai. It doesn't exist anywhere else in China or the world. So you'll have a gate like this, and then behind it, you will have row houses that sort of use some Chinese elements. They use a British row house structure. But you'll see it's not really, you would never find a development like this in Britain, because these, the gates block off the traffic. So these are completely pedestrianized streets. So in some ways it's like the hutong. This is traditional Chinese urbanism you see in Beijing, where you have these walled compounds off from the street, except you have this British row house structure within it. So, finally the city, this is the most cosmopolitan city in China, is developing its own language of unique to the city. By the 1920s, Chinese companies are building skyscrapers. This is the tallest building outside of the Americas when it's erected. This is bigger than any building in Europe. It's the Park Hotel. It's built by the Chinese Savings Fund Society, which is a banking concern. That's the building today. One of the great things is so many of these are still there. Bombay's development is very parallel. Bombay's development begins when this fort that the British East India Company built in Bombay is turned into a city. These walls are removed, and the British governor of Bombay decides that the city, to be modern, will need to have every institution a modern city would have. So he brainstorms a list. He writes out a list. It involves a post office, a train station, telegraph office, courthouse, university. Then he builds them in a row along where the fort walls had been in this Victorian Gothic style. All these buildings are still there, by the way. And this is the University of Bombay. This is one of his buildings. And for this, he taps the leading architect of Britain at that time, Sir Gilbert Scott. And Sir Gilbert Scott draws up the plans for the university in his studio in London and just nails them to Bombay. He never sets foot in India. He decides that the thinking is Victorian, is a Gothic, sort of Italian or Southern French Gothic makes sense for India because India is sunny and so is Southern France. And they build this stuff, and actually one of these buildings copies a form right off the Doge's Palace in Venice. This is the buildings right after they're constructed. And as I'll point out, I think in this new sort of reglobalization era, we have things almost this egregious. We don't quite have you don't quite have the architect not showing up in the country, but we have something very, very close. Even worse than someone who's never been here taking a tour for an hour of Durham and thinking he knows what he's talking about. Here's a best practice that's dropped down by the British that takes off in India in a way that I would argue is even more crucial for India's development than for England's. We can all laugh, but the tube signage, this is the tube signage that's used for the entire Indian rail system to this day, the London Tube signage. But the British build the first railway in Asia, connecting Bombay, which is an island off the coast of the subcontinent, to the rest of the country. And the main thinking of the British in doing this is to ship freight. I mean, they want all of the goods from the subcontinent, all the gems and the wood and the riches of India to be brought to Bombay so it can be shipped to Europe and sold by the British East India Company. What ends up happening is, yes, that, but also this passenger rail system that links the entire subcontinent, a much larger landmass than Britain, and especially today when most Indians cannot afford to fly, but the rail system, you can literally, if you're willing to go in a class that's also open to livestock, you can cross the entire subcontinent for $10. It creates an incredible amount of mobility within India that still defines it to this day. We also get in this 1920s and 30s era, American companies supporting their best practices. In this case, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Corporation of Los Angeles, California's finest Art Deco movie palace, designed by an architect in New York, originally from Scotland. It's called the Metro, after MGM. Even has the trademark lions. If you know anything about India, you know that the film industry there takes off in a way that it makes it the world's largest film industry, and you even develop sort of language of Indian movie houses, which we'll get into. This is the Metro, and this is very much sort of dropped down. These look, I mean, I feel like this guy saw the Rockefeller Center or the Empire State Building going up outside of his office in New York and thought they would make really nice chandeliers. And then they become the chandeliers here, and you have this fin could be on Radio City Music Hall. Then you get Indian architects doing all sorts of fascinating things. The Art Deco movie palace becomes sort of all the rage in Bombay in the way that it is in Los Angeles, and because of the way the city's developed, actually a lot more of these still exist in Bombay than do in LA. This is the Eros cinema in a period shot from the 30s. Here, this is the Liberty. This is designed. It was supposed to be designed by a British architect who died in a plane crash right around Independence, and was completed by an Indian architect. And it's called the Liberty because it was the first movie house that would only, like, first-class movie house that would only show Indian language films. So you see how something that started with a company in Los Angeles and an architect in New York dropping something on Bombay becomes Indian. The Art Deco style is all over Bombay. It's technically, if it started anywhere, it started in Paris. It's named after the Exposition des Arts Décoratifs et Industriels, which is a art and architecture symposium in Paris in the 1920s. But as they noticed in Miami, they also noticed in Bombay that these forms work really well for tropical cities. If you have the stucco, and with you can sort of take what in a cold city like New York or Chicago might just be a string course, just a line, and you can turn it into a patio that everybody gets there, everybody overlooking the street. I mean, this really looks like Miami Beach, but this is Marine Drive in Bombay, again. And you have all these interesting details on the buildings. This is a lot of local motifs are worked in, very much like Miami, but with these are waves and seashells from the beachfront. Here, this is in the Liberty. This is an Art Deco Quran. This is in the office, the owner's office. He's an Indian Muslim. And he commissioned an Art Deco Quran, something you probably won't find in Miami Beach. And then today, in each city, I would argue that because of the sort of Maoist period and the Nehru period, the closing of both of these cities, they haven't quite, in some ways, they're less futuristic now than they were in their heydays in the 1920s and 30s. We're back into things being dropped onto these cities without much contribution from the locals yet, but there is hope. So this is Shanghai's business district being built, and it could be, I mean, it could be anywhere really, right? I mean, we could rattle off cities on any number of continents, and I could convince you that that's where this was, which I don't think is all that encouraging a sign. This is the Jinmao Tower. This was designed by an architect in Chicago who had never been to Shanghai when he submitted the plans that won the competition. This is the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world, designed by the same Chicago architect, and designed by looking out his office window at the Lakeview Towers in Chicago and thinking, oh, what if I did this and this and this? And then I have him on the record saying he told the client in Dubai that it's a desert flower. And it's all this. So, unfortunately, history seems to be repeating itself. It's almost as egregious as a London architect building a university for Bombay and not even visiting India. Some of these wounds are sort of self-inflicted. You have this vogue for European styles in contemporary China. This is a housing development called British Manor. It does some, it's poorly spelled, but you get the sense. I'm not going to comment on this, but I found that charming. And this is Thames Town outside of Shanghai, built to look like a British town. As with every real British town, it has a statue of both Winston Churchill and James Bond in the center of it. It has an entire fake church where real brides dress up like European brides and take wedding photos in front of red phone booths. It's notable. This is the new Mumbai rising. Which looks sort of like Greek temple, like a Parthenon stretched 33 stories into the air, and then with like a second Parthenon, like drop down on top. That's like normal proportion. This is all the rage. This looks like, as far as I can tell, a Roman villa that's actually a Pizza Hut. And then, back to the Twin Chrysler buildings in Dubai. This is Arabian Ranches. This looks like a gated community out of Southern California. That looks like traffic circle out of Southern California. Again, more of that. This looks like Arabian Ranches, but that's actually outside of Beijing. It's called Orange County. It's a Southern California themed gated community outside of Beijing. And when I was there, it was around New Year's, and all the water elements were frozen solid, which wouldn't happen in Orange County, California. So in this new era of globalization, as you see from all these little examples, we have a lot of these kind of things being dropped down again, without the types of processes that developed into the really fascinating and interesting and local, in certain twisted sense, sort of cosmopolitanly local, of the Lilong in Shanghai, or the Art Deco movie palace in Bombay. This is the grand opening of India's first Krispy Kreme donut shop. North Carolina will conquer the world. It's in Bangalore. And then, but here, this is interesting. Now, this is where my book ends, which is this looks like it's in China. It's actually in New York City, and it has this multi-story urbanism that you would see in a Chinese city. It has this looks so much like Sincere department store in Shanghai. This is in a Chinatown. This is in Queens, New York, in Flushing, which is the largest Chinatown in New York City, but not the most famous because it's in Queens. And here you have Chinese real estate developers from China investing in the U.S. and building in forms, in American forms, in Chinese forms in America. So much like, sort of like the revenge of the Getz brothers. The revenge on the Getz brothers. When they were dropping their San Francisco department store in Shanghai 150 years ago, now Chinese businessmen are dropping their forms upon places like New York, Vancouver, etc. This is across the street. I think this is actually the side of the same mall. It has that same look. And then this is around the corner. And here I think this is really notable. This is on the ground floor. I wish I were. I'm a better writer than I am a photographer, but this is a fruit stand, fruit vegetable stand. This is a restaurant above it, and then back here you had like there's a restaurant up here, there's karaoke, there's all the different things. Oh. And what's really interesting here is that this form fits New York so well, and it's a form that no one in New York thought of. It's a form from China. This multi-story urbanism. This is a transit hub in New York. This is where the 7 train ends. All these buses come together. It's this bustling thing, and it's the kind of thing that New York should have thought of. I mean, the great Dutch urbanist Rem Koolhaas, wrote the book Delirious New York, a retroactive manifesto for Manhattan. It talks about New York is this kind of over the top, stacked up urban Frankenstein. And yet this form comes from China. I think this is a very hopeful sign that we have some sense finally to learn from each other, not just have the West sort of dropping things down. That doesn't mean that we're in the clear. I think in this moment of globalization, as I pointed out, with things like the Jinmao Tower and the Burj Khalifa, there's the temptation to just have stars, starchitects from wherever drop down their buildings wherever, without even visiting, without thinking about local context. without considering local conditions or the climate or the essence of the city, what the city is about. And yet there's also this hope that things that are sort of quintessentially, that are sort of perfect for a city can arise from somewhere else in the world and can be imported. And I think that's hopefully one of the aspects that when our panel who hail from all over the world can discuss is what is found abroad that might fit Chapel Hill really well or Durham really well, or how can Raleigh tweak something that somebody found in Bogota, Colombia, or Amsterdam. This is the famous STRATEQ in Copenhagen on a very atypically sunny Copenhagen day. This is the inspiration for this, which is the sort of redeveloped Times Square in the part of Manhattan, where these picnic tables are set up and it's sort of pedestrianized. The way this happened was two Danish experts were commissioned to sort of apply best practices from all over the world into New York. And this is what you got. And this is truly an improvement over what Times Square was with just a bunch of traffic going, breaking the speed limit in the middle of the quote-unquote crossroads of the world. But I don't think I can't help but thinking it's not that. So this form seems to fit Copenhagen with the scale of the streets better than this form fits Manhattan with the scale here. Also, this form seems to fit, in some ways, is a better fit with the outlook of a city like Copenhagen, with the conception of the good life in a city like Copenhagen, which is much more about like work-life balance than the conception of the good life in New York, which is much more about sort of maximizing your finite time on Earth with as much scheduled activity as possible. Which is, and like, some people would prefer to live in Copenhagen, some people would prefer to live in New York, and that's fine. But like, you want each, New York should be the best New York it can be, and Copenhagen should be the best Copenhagen it should be. It shouldn't be just, this worked in Copenhagen, let's just drop it here. And I hate to sort of harp on these, but I feel like under Mayor Bloomberg, and I know it's very politically incorrect to say it in a sustainable business school, but I think there's been a lot of this kind of poorly thought out importation of things that work better in Europe than they do in the American context. So this is a bike lane in Stockholm, and these are amazing. You'll note the scale of this building. So it's very different than New York. You'll also note that how much infrastructure is actually spent on this. Often in the U.S., in New Orleans, whoa, it's just considered a cheap infrastructural improvement that involves no infrastructure, and they paint a line. Or sometimes they just paint a bicycle symbol in a traffic lane, which is a really great way to get yourself killed. Here, there's all of this infrastructure investment to separate the lane out. And there are dedicated signals. Some of you, I know you were in Sweden and Copenhagen, saw all of this on your summer trip. They're dedicated signals, so you'll wait and it's pedestrians walk here, and then there's the bicycle, and the bicyclists go here, and then there's the traffic, and then there's a streetcar, and the streetcar has dedicated lane. None of this seems to exist in the U.S. Here's a Parisian cafe. Oh no, sorry, my slides are out of order. And here's a New York cafe. And look at this is a pedestrian plaza. This is on a square, it's close to traffic. And the cafe is able to get the entire sidewalk. In New York, they have to put up this actual barrier. You have to put up sort of a wall to keep the pedestrians separate from here because the street is entirely dedicated to cars. And my father, who's not an urbanist, he's a very accomplished guy, but he's not an urbanist, and but he has a good sense of things. And he says, when I'm in Paris or I'm in Vienna, I always request to sit outside at the cafe table. And when I'm in New York, I always request to sit inside. And I think that sort of innately understands that the cities have different conceptions of the good life and are organized structurally around different things. That certain things work better in Paris than they do in New York. Sorry, I feel bad that my slides are slightly out of order. This is the Stockholm, and this is the New York equivalent with a line painted, right? I guess a plant or two. And the scale is completely different. I have a friend who's a bicycle commuter in New York. He rides his bicycle from Brooklyn to Penn Station every day, and then his job's in New Jersey. Then he gets the train to New Jersey, and I said, "Wow, that's a pretty long haul, Brendan. Why do you do that?" And he said, "It's because it's the fastest way for me to get to Penn Station." It's amazing that the subway system in New York has not been improved in 100 years. It snakes around at 4 miles an hour under Lower Manhattan. It's actually quicker to go by bicycle. Meanwhile, in Hong Kong, this was the last time I was in Hong Kong, this is the central station in Hong Kong. Where's the central station? Well, they're doing all these infrastructural improvements. The central station is hidden, but it's in here. And this is constantly upgraded. I just sort of came across the fact that the Circle Line in Tokyo, it's older. I think it's from the late 1800s, so it's older than I think every subway in the US except Boston. And it's been consistently upgraded every generation so that it now travels at 55 miles per hour, the train. And then, like, look at the trolley in Boston. It's probably going the same speed it went over 100 years ago when they built it. So I think a lot of these things, it's not to make it, New York the point is that New York can put in a bicycle lane, which is great, but New York is about speed. And a bicycle lane, if a bicycle lane is the fastest way to get around, it's because the city has kind of, in some sense, lost contact with what its essence is, with what it's about, and also because it's a cheap way to do things. Finally, here this is a cafe that was put up on Parking Day. I don't know, some of you probably know about Parking Day. It's when urbanists turn parking spaces all over the world into interesting non-parking functions. And here, this is the Chief of Transportation and Planning, and several sort of Bloomberg bureaucrats from New York turning the parking space into a cafe table. And I think here this is notable because it shows that the urban space, to really reconfigure urban space, may require more than just painting a bicycle on a street sign. You may need to reconfigure things. And again, this is, what are they doing? Like, are they really going to extend the sidewalks? Are they really going to, if they really want to go this route, they can go this route. But it would involve investment, and I think that's always sort of been the what's missing. Finally, I think it's important to look for best practices everywhere. This is really fun. I mean, this is where you least suspect it. This is in Dubai. Where you have an 18-lane road going through the heart of the city. And they've just put in all of these, what are they? They're air-conditioned bus shelters. So you can wait for the bus in comfort in Dubai. I kind of wish we had these in New Orleans, although then I think in New Orleans they can't even have a book drop at the main library because of people use it as a garbage can. So, maybe this is the best practice that can't be applied. But the point is, we should all be taking this seriously, and we should be learning from everywhere. Here, the city that's the most synonymous with those traffic circle SUVs, mega car traffic jams, came up with a better mousetrap, I think, for a bus shelter. And on that, I'd like to end my talk. Thank you.
Well, my name is Cor Rademaker, and as I was perfectly and very nicely introduced, CEO of STRATEQ, company in Holland. throughout the years it existed, we have been involved in a lot of developments in the Netherlands and also in some other countries. My speech is about connecting the cities. There's a movement towards cities when the cities have a good economy, and a good economy exists by good grids or good infrastructure. No, that's not the one. Yeah. So, the history of the cities, you see the first cities in, for instance, in the Netherlands, they existed along, at that time, the most efficient grid, that was a river or a canal. And actually the Hanse cities, or Hansesteden as we call it in Dutch, controlled all the trade routes in the northern Europe countries. Later, so you have different steps in urbanization. So it starts with urbanization along the main grid at that time, the most efficient grid, that was waterways, at least in Holland. You see that the next step in urbanization will be in the 18th century when hygiene and actually a good access to other cities became apparent. And also, it was the startup of the industrialization, so you've got also a lot more economic activities in the cities and around the cities. Later, during say the first decades of the 20th century, you see train systems coming up, efficient train systems coming up, metro systems, so different stages in infrastructure where you've got different grids, different, and it allows to have better economic development. So you see every time a flux towards the cities. So cities like in Holland or also other European countries had major steps in growth at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, and at the end of the 20th century, and now again. Let me see. You see, in cities will develop when they grow. They can develop from, say, cities to metropolis to megalopolis. And a megalopolis is a major city. You have a few of those in the world at the moment. And in Holland, you could say that it's called Randstad, the cities Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague, and Utrecht, and everything around it. And it's circled around a green area. It's called the Green Heart. That makes living in that area still livable. So we call it the green lungs of the Randstad city. It's basically originally an agricultural area, but it's more and more a recreational area. And one of the cities in the middle is, it was not allowed to develop in this green lungs, in this green area, but one of the cities in the middle is growing rapidly against all odds, because it's right in the center of this Randstad area. Well, there's urbanization in Europe at the moment, pretty intense, especially in the West. And where you see the growth of population, the growth of people who start to live in cities, you see that we have now about 50% of the population worldwide in cities, and will grow into 70% in 2040. Oh, and maybe that's a good thing to notice. Just 100 cities in the world account for 30% of the economy, of the worldwide economy. So you see that cities have a lot of economic development, a lot of innovation, a lot of creativity, and they attract more people by it. Well, the grids, or infrastructure, is essential. Cities can grow when the efficiency of the grids will grow. So this says that there is a need for smarter grids because, if you look at the centers of the cities, which we just talked about, for instance, the subway in New York, which is still going around everything, and as the same speed as it had 100 years ago, there's a need for a smarter and more efficient use of the grids that are already existing. So that calls for smarter grids or smarter cities. And so this is called smart city. And that is the main thing. If you see developments of the cities of today, you see this term smart city coming up more and more. Basically, the definition of smart cities is that it says actually pretty clear. You see, the smart city concept essentially means efficiency, efficient use of grids. And the grids are smart economy, smart mobility, smart environment, smart people. So you use knowledge, for instance, connect knowledge, smart living, and smart governance. How do we create a smart city? And we create a smart city by connecting people, the technology, and the creativity, the ideas. And a city is actually a very good platform to do that, because it has all the resources to do that. So the ingredients for sustainable grid, or smart city, are innovation, involvement, awareness, energy, respect, creativity, and flexibility. The main cities in Europe, these are the capitals, are ranked. You can actually measure how smart a city is. Here you see the indicators, the same indicators that we talked before. And you can, for instance, see if you look at smart governance, you can define that as enabling supply and demand side policy, transparency and open data, and ICT and governance. Or you can look at smart living, culturally vibrant and happy, safe, healthy. So if you rank the cities, you see, and we saw some slides of it, and also in the presentation before, that Copenhagen is the most smart city in Europe from the capitals. Amsterdam is second. They have the most smart city projects and is evolving rapidly on that line. So these are some smart city projects in Amsterdam. They define 3 areas in the region, and they play a special role. They actually centered most of the projects in those 3 regions. And you can see there are all kinds of projects. It's just an example. Smart working, glass fiber, climate streets. It's really interesting that the climate street is a street in Amsterdam, a very nice street. And all the businesses along that street have come together and made their own grids for energy, for lighting, for all kinds of things that make that street a much more, a much nicer street to be in and to go to. So the business attracted by that people, and people, you know, they're mostly shops and restaurants and this sort of thing, and so they need people to thrive, and these kind of things attract people to that street. It's backed up, and I think that's essential, by the government. Europe, as government, has defined 2 real big project areas with a lot of money. The one is the European Innovation Partnership on Smart Cities and Communities, and the aim is to have the 2020, 20% green energy. It's connecting cities, industries, etc. And it's based on strategic partnerships between public and private parties. The other one is the European Technology for Electricity of the Future. That says it all, actually. The mid-sized companies, the mid-sized cities in Europe European Union has defined 70 cities that they contribute to make a smart city. The criteria are there's at least one university, and it is less than 1.5 million inhabitants, but it is more than 100,000. So these cities, you can actually rank them as you, as you see here, on smart economy, smart people, smart governance, smart mobility, smart environment, smart living, and the total. They're just ranked, and you can see the difference between the cities. So what you also get is competitiveness between the cities. The smart city benefits different levels of learning, profiling, awareness, inspiring, bonding, and it contributes to climate goals, which are really essential. Smart cities are all about creating or connecting networks, ideas and opportunities. It's creating, innovating. Bring the city into a sustainable future. You can use, if you look at what it does for innovation, what it does for climate, and what it does for people, innovation, smart concepts, technology, where you need climate, the pollution, water and food shortage. It addresses food and drought and the energy. And with people, it creates awareness, behavior, and vision. Well, these are future city trends. It's a whole list, I must say. It's more that the things are not like top-down like it used to be, but it's more bottom-up and participation society. So both the top and the bottom are going to cooperate to achieve goals. It will be a community economy. So the economies, it's not like larger scales, but going back to the communities. And it also has a different set of economy. So now we buy everything, and when we use it, we throw it away. And at that time, you know, the idea is that we don't buy it anymore, but we kind of lease it. And the one who produced it is still the owner of the product and has to take it back. But somewhere, you know, some of this thing will happen. It will be a more life cycle based housing areas. So it's not that you have to go, move every time something changes in your life cycle. For instance, you get kids or you get old. You can stay in your house. Your house can adapt to the life cycle where you are. We got flexible cities. You see flux towards the city, so cities grow. But at the other hand, you see people that are on a high level educated. For instance, they move out. They can work almost anywhere they will. So you see the same thing that happened actually in the end of the 19th century. You will have flexible working places. You won't have offices anymore with a lot of space, but you will have, you know, a place where people come together and work out things that they work out ideas, get ideas, discuss things. But they work, for instance, at home or in other places. They will be much more flexible in where they work. It's like, you know, you can study in a park, or you can study at home, or you can study in the university. More efficient transportation systems. It will happen. Cars are actually a system that came out of the 19th century and more or less outdated today. There will be a local waste management, so those large-scale things will go back to the community or back to the areas. So the waste won't leave the area anymore. You actually know what, you know, now you put the things at the side of the street and that magically disappears. But then you really have a responsibility to do something with the waste, to think about it and to get over it, reuse it actually. Same with local energy initiatives. The energy will come back to the community. Community will take action to build local energy grids and systems. Same with products. You know, the food now, your food is coming from Brazil or China. Nobody knows, and people are eager to get their food again, like in the hands. They know where it comes from. So you get more and more urban farming projects, and you can already see that, for instance, in New York, there's a lot of knowledge-based society and efficiency through technology and digitalize the world. Well, this is just an idea. This is a garden, a park where water is purified. So people actually barbecue where the wastewater is right there, but you don't smell it anymore, because it's a different system of use of attributing to wastewater. These are some climate projects in the Netherlands, just a list. Well, innovation is and will be the major influence for the next couple of years. And the question is, what will bring this to us in the next 30 years? There's some questions about it. How will future transportation develop? What will be the impact of future technology? What will be the effect and impact of a virtual world, living in a virtual world? How will our social and economic structure change? And can we adjust the cities to climate change? It's all things that will address to the cities and how we use cities and how we build cities. That's it. Thank you.
So thank you, Cor, for those future-looking thoughts. And to bring a more local perspective, I want to invite Matt Corbett up to speak about some transformation that's been happening in Durham.
Good evening. All right, let's try that again. All right, so I'm going to say good evening. Everybody here's going to say good evening back, right? So good evening. Good evening. All right, that's better. I'm Matthew Coppage. I am the Chief Operating Officer of Downtown Durham Incorporated. I've been with the organization for the last 10 years, so I've seen a lot of changes. I want to check with everybody, who's been to Downtown Durham in the past year? All right, that's good. When I started 10 years ago, I'd ask that question, and we get maybe 10% of the people who had been to Downtown Durham. So it's definitely a big change, and we're excited about it. So what I want to do is really talk about kind of history of Durham really quick, talk about where we've come from, what we've done over the past 20 years as an organization, and kind of where we're going here moving forward. So most people know Downtown Durham was a tobacco town. You know, the Dukes had their tobacco empire in Durham. They created the American Tobacco Company. It's kind of in the late 1800s, early 1900s. The American Tobacco Company is one of the largest companies ever in U.S. history. It was broken up with the monopoly laws in the early 1900s. And that created a number of different tobacco companies, Liggett Myers, Imperial Tobacco. And what happened was all these different tobacco companies were still located in downtown, and they were all building these great warehouses to compete with the other tobacco warehouses. So that's why you have this really cool architecture in downtown Durham, because all these companies wanted to be better than the other companies. So what happened was in the 50s, 60s, the tobacco industry started to decline. And in the 80s and 90s, everybody was gone. The tobacco industry was virtually gone from downtown Durham. We had put in the downtown loop, which was designed, and one-way streets to get traffic out of downtown Durham because it was so busy in the 60s. Well, unfortunately, traffic couldn't get around downtown. It got traffic out of downtown, and they never came back. So what we were dealing with as an organization when we were formed in the 90s was 50% office occupancy rates. So it was pretty dismal in downtown. There was virtually nobody living in downtown Durham. And so our organization was formed when Andy Widmark, who's a professor over at Fuqua School of Business at Duke, he actually had he owned property in downtown, so he was losing all this value in his property. And he's like, well, how do we fix this? What do we do to revitalize our downtown? So what he did was had one of his Fuqua Business School classes for an entire semester look at what have other cities done to revitalize their downtown. And the one thing every other city had done was create an organization like a DDI, Downtown Durham Inc., that day in and day out focuses on downtown revitalization. And that's how we were formed in the 90s. So I graduated from UNC in 1997, and at that point, obviously, was anybody here in 1997 in the Triangle? Some of you. Okay, so downtown Durham sucked. I mean, that's the only word that describes what it was. People were scared to go downtown, and that's a problem that generally downtowns have in the U.S., especially in the South. But that was the view. It was dangerous. You're going to get shot if you go down there, whatever, all this stuff. So we had to figure out what we had as a community that was different than what everybody else had. Everybody knows what to do. You throw some retail on the ground floor, and you have people living downtown and working downtown. Anybody knows that. It's hard to actually get it done. So what we did was try and figure out what we had as a community to leverage to actually bring people in that were interested. So obviously I'm going to go through some pictures here of what downtown was at that point. This is the American Tobacco campus. The upper left, you can see the trees growing out of the roof at American Tobacco. This is directly across from the ballpark. You had to wear hazmat masks to go into the buildings there because the pigeon droppings were so bad. It cost $100,000 just to clean that up. So it was pretty bad, right across from the ballpark. And what would happen is people would come to ball games, and they would see this right next door, and why on earth would they stay in downtown Durham? There's no reason for them to stay. This is American Tobacco while it was under construction, but you can see, it was pretty bad. This is after they'd torn out some of the things in the upper right. They were building one of the parking decks. This is where the Durham train station is, the top two pictures, the old Heart of Durham Hotel. The bottom left-hand picture is Main Street. The bottom right-hand picture is Chapel Hill Street. If you're familiar with the Cupcake Bar and those things that have opened at 5 Points in downtown Durham across from Toast, that's what these buildings looked like. This is kind of in the 80s. This is Main Street. So this is where Dave's Chicken and Waffles is, all those businesses that have now opened along Main Street. This is what we had. So in 1994, this is what we started with. My boss, Bill Kalkoff, who just retired last year, was the president of DDI for 20 years. He took the job because his ego was big enough to think he could actually do something, and you could not do any worse than what we had. It was completely impossible. So this is what we started with. What did we want to create? So we realized, obviously, we had these cool old tobacco warehouses, which a lot of communities in the 80s, they tore them down. We were lucky enough where people didn't care enough about downtown Durham to spend the money to tear down our old buildings. So we had 30 tobacco warehouses that were still standing. We had all the historic buildings kind of in the city center, in the Loop district. And so we had to figure out what to do with those, how do you get them developed, how do you bring developers to do it, and then what companies would actually locate in our downtown. So one, we wanted to create this live, work, play environment that everybody's striving for in their downtown, 24/7 downtown. We really focused on the second one, create this environment where people can easily interact with each other, so it's the complete opposite of an office park. RTP has just redone their master plan, and what they've done is they're going to try and make RTP a little more urban, where they have people living and working in that area. They have places to go to a coffee shop or whatever. We were trying to create that because that's where creative class people want to be, and those were the people that we were trying to attract from downtown. We wanted to create an environment that appealed to talent. The number one thing companies are looking for is talent. And we've got these universities, obviously, Duke, UNC, NC State, NCCU. We've got these great universities, people coming out of these universities. How do we keep them around? How do we give them things to do so they don't move on to DC or New York or Austin or Boston? Which is who we're competing with now. Like, when we recruit companies into downtown Durham, we don't compete with Raleigh or Chapel Hill or Charlotte. We're competing with Boston, Austin, Silicon Valleys. Which, again, is much different than it was 20 years ago. So we were thinking of doing the creative class. Daniel and I were laughing about this earlier on. Richard Florida, who wrote the creative class, Rise of the Creative Class, he coined that term, but people were doing it before that. Luckily, we were doing it. Recruiting the architects, recruiting the design firms, the ad agencies into your downtown to actually help build this environment that we're trying to build. So this is today. Most of you have seen this. In the upper left, you see the old Bull building. When it was covered with this pink tin they put on it in the 60s, which actually luckily preserved it. It's this beautiful white building that you see down here in one of the tobacco factories. It's actually the office building. It's now residential units. So this is just some before and after pictures. American Tobacco again, upper left, and most of you have probably been here. This is really one of the most spectacular developments that you'll walk into. This river that actually didn't have any water in it today when we were walking around it, unfortunately. But it cost $2 million to put that in. So Capital Broadcasting, who owns the Durham Bulls, they put this in, and they put the extra money in to make it just something spectacular. Because in 2004, no company considered downtown Durham to move into. So this is one of the things that really, helped put us on the map as a downtown back in 2004. Again, some more American Tobacco pictures before and after. This is West Village, so done by Brian Davis and Christian Laettner, played basketball at Duke. They did this back in 1999, and they were told nobody would ever live in downtown Durham. Nobody would ever live. They live there, and they are 99% occupied. There are never any move-in specials. This was just sold to a company called Federal Capital Partners, who is actually building another 200 or so units. This is about 500, about 600 actually, of loft apartments units in downtown. This is the ballpark. So in the upper left, you see the parking lot where the ballpark was built. Originally, American Tobacco was going to be the Museum of Life and Science. That was a deal was put together in the early 90s to move the Museum of Life and Science to American Tobacco. The ballpark was going to be built where University Ford is, and then where the ballpark is was going to be a GlaxoSmithKline office building. That money to build parking deck went out to the voters, and all the voters said no. So the Durham voters said no. The four most controversial projects in Durham over the last 25 years, South Point Mall, obviously not in downtown, the Bulls Ballpark, American Tobacco, and the Performing Arts Center. There were a couple of organizations, us being one of them, that pushed the 3 in downtown. Got a lot of errors in the back. People said nobody will ever buy $75 tickets in downtown Durham to go see Broadway. They were right, they'll pay $150. So there's a lot of these things that would never pass if they had gone out to the voters. So our city council said, we're going to pass these things. We think they're good for Durham. And now I would argue that those are the 4 main things that Durham's known for. So these deals are very difficult to get done a lot of times, and they take years of planning. I think a lot of people don't understand the complicated efforts. And I think we'll talk about this a little in the panel about the partnerships that kind of help put these together and how, one, complicated they are, how long they take, but what they produce afterwards is really spectacular, as long as you do it right. This is DPAC, the lot where DPAC was. And has everybody been to DPAC? If you haven't, you should get over there. It's just a fantastic facility. So we have gone in 1994 when we started from 3,800 employees to just over 16,000 now. 112 residential units to 1,000, and we are adding 700 more over the next year. 1.1 million visitors to 2.3 million, 1 million square feet of 70% occupancy to 3 million square feet at 93% occupancy. And we've had over $1 billion worth of investment. And we're only talking about 12 by 16 blocks in downtown Durham. So it's been a huge amount of investment in a really small area in a really short time frame. When we were formed, most downtowns have had organizations like ours for 40, 50, 60 years, and we've been at it for 20. So these are just some pictures of where we are today. So we have had 90 retail businesses, so street-level restaurant and retail businesses open since 2010. So if you walk down Main Street, it's a completely different vibe than it was. We as an organization see challenges. So our organization, we're the engine for economic development in downtown. A lot of organizations like ours do events in cities. That's not really what we do. We're more the deal makers. And so we focus on economic development, parking issues, and those type of things. So we see things that are challenges to our community, and we try and fix them. So one of the things was we have 50 businesses on Main Street. None of them had projecting signs. All their signs were in their window. So if you see like Motor Coast sign, the parlor sign, we have a sign grant. And so we actually said, you have to put it, it has to be projected, it has to be lit. It can be neon, we don't care. Put it out there so it's vibrant. People can see it as pedestrians walking up and down the street. And it has to be lit, so it feels safer at night. So we have about 35 signs that went up through our sign grant program. So we do stuff from that kind of street level stuff to the major projects like American Tobacco and DPAC. So we're the middleman that helps put those deals together. We lobby the city council. We find the private developers to actually do the project. We've got tons of national recognition. We seem to get new national accolades every month, it seems. You see some of them up here. Wired named us one of the top 10 tech towns. Number 1 for percentage of creative class workforce in the country. Top 10 places to live. We get these accolades all the time. One of the interesting ones is this New Geography of Jobs book, which is actually a pretty depressing book if you read it, because it's basically saying that most cities in the country are really going to have a challenge over the next 50 years in creating jobs and bringing people into their areas. But on the back cover is this quote: "At one extreme are the brain hubs, cities like San Francisco, Boston, and Durham, with workers who are one of the most productive, creative, and best paid on the planet." So now it's not just me telling people in forums like this and garden clubs that want us to talk to them that we're it's a pretty cool city to be in. We're getting national recognition for these type of things that we're doing. I also want to touch on DPAC. So DPAC, when we built this about 5 years ago, I think we opened in 2008 actually. You didn't know how good it was going to be, but for the last 2 years we've been in the top 5 in theaters in the country for ticket sales. So behind Radio City Music Hall, Caesar's Palace in Vegas, and the theater in Minnesota, Minneapolis, and we're 4th behind those. I mean, those are the types of places that we're competing with now. You can see world-class shows, world-class comedy, music acts at DPAC, 20-minute drive from here. So it's great to have this in the Triangle. National accolades for our restaurants. Hopefully everybody's checked out the food scene in downtown. We're the tastiest towns by Southern Living, just named that last year. Bon Appetit named us the foodiest small town in America. And some of the stuff that we're doing with tech is pretty impressive. And I want to take a minute, and one of our startups is in here. So we, one of the things that our organization and the chamber like to do is we like to support what's going on. There's a really cool article from Brad Feld, who's he does Techstars. I don't know if you're familiar with the startup culture, but they're an incubator over in Boulder. And he wrote this thing called Leaders and Feeders. And so basically what you have in a community are leaders who are going to be like entrepreneurs or restaurateurs, those type of things. They have to lead what the community is going to be. They're going to be here for 20 years, where an organization like ours has to feed into that system. So, I may be here for another 5 years, but I'm going to be gone. It's the entrepreneurs who are going to have to lead efforts to actually get things done in a community. So we realize that we're not trying to create these agendas and create things that the entrepreneurs don't want. So what we do is we sit down with the tech entrepreneurs. We did this 3 or 4 years ago and said, what do you think entrepreneurs need for us to do? They're like, one, get out of the way. Don't put any roadblocks in our way. And then there's one of the guys, Aaron Houghton, who just sold Eye Contact for $180 million, a UNC grad, he's 34. Great guy, he sold it 2 years ago, was like, you should just give away free space. So we're like, all right, we can do that. So we got a 3,500 square foot office space called the Startup Stampede, Wool City Startup Stampede. We gave away office space for 60 days to 15 companies the first time. We did 3 sessions, about 45 companies total. Gave them free space, hooked them up with entrepreneurs who had sold companies, hooked them up with accountants and legal teams, so they could actually get a 60-day runway where they get free internet and all this stuff for free, get the connections with all the entrepreneurs, which is what they really needed. We ran that session, ran those sessions. They were fantastic, got us kind of regional attention. We had about 25 companies stay in downtown Durham. Some are still in business, some aren't. It's, that's the way of startups. But now we've grown to about 130 startups in downtown Durham. The American Underground, which you may have heard of, which is the bottom right. So the American Underground is basically incubator, kind of accelerator space. Have a number of different small startups, and then companies that actually work with startups. The SMOffice, it's not SM Office, yeah, it's the smallest office. So this was the world's smallest office space competition we had 2 years ago. We gave a company, and actually released this nationally, gave a company 6 months of free space in the front window of BU Cafe, which is right on Main Street, if you're familiar with downtown. We gave them an apartment for 6 months. We did the same thing with Stampede, hooked them up with everybody that could actually help their business. We released that nationally, and what our plan was is in like 2015 to hopefully do all these cool things that would get noticed by TechCrunch and the New York Times and these big startup blogs. We put all this package together. We've done these 20 different things. We released this video the day that we released this competition. TechStars covers it. TechCrunch covers it. We were covered by the New York Times, by Fast Company, by all these different publications and magazines. Then we went to Doha, Qatar last year, and we won the World Chambers Congress most unconventional chamber project in the world. Which again, this is marketing that we're not really having to pay for. We were competing with organizations that have spent $30 and $40 million on campaigns and different things. We spent about $20,000, and we won the competition. So I think being innovative and being creative, kind of what these guys were touching on in their talk, is really important. You don't have to spend a lot of money, but being innovative and creative as a community can really help drive what you're doing forward. And then just the major companies that we have in downtown. Burt's Bees is located in downtown. McKinney did the Travelocity Rolling Yellow ads for years. They do the world's greatest spokesperson in the world, the nationwide commercials. They do Ruby Tuesday's account. Merge Records, if you're familiar with Arcade Fire, they won the Grammy for Best Album a couple years ago. Their record labels in downtown Durham, which a lot of people don't know. Obviously the Bulls. Google actually just opened an office. We're now one of 7 tech hubs in the country for Google. They debuted Google Glass at Bay 7 for the public back in, I guess, October or so sometime last year. So we're now on that list to get those things first. So if you want to see some cool things that Google's doing, kind of first pass, I'd get on their list at American Underground, and they'll be announcing those things over the next year. And then on the horizon, what we have going on right now. Our SunTrust Tower in the upper left, this was actually done by the architect who did the Empire State Building, in the upper left there. I don't know if he actually came down. He may have just sent plans, but I'm not positive. This is going to be a 21C hotel. This is under renovation right now. If you're not familiar with 21C, this is actually the best hotels in the country. They have a hotel in Louisville, which was named the best hotel by Condé Nast in 2010 and 11. And their Cincinnati hotel was just named it this past year. So they're opening a high-end boutique hotel in downtown. The same with the Aloft Hotel is opening around DPAC. That's being built right now. And then we have a number of residential units. So we have about 1,000 current units in downtown and 700 under construction for residential units. So we're almost doubling our residential units over the next couple of years. And then we have 187 rooms right now for hotels. And we have about 400 that are under construction by next year. So tripling our hotel rooms, and we're doubling our residential units. So we're going to see some big changes in downtown. We've seen some big changes lately, but I'm not sure that we're all prepared as a community over there to what's coming next. It's a good thing. And the nice thing is people appreciate these old cool buildings that we've tried to reuse, kind of sustainable development, what we've tried to do in downtown. And that's really where people have wanted to locate that we've been recruiting. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you guys. Thanks.
Great, well, thank you for that. At this time, I invite the panel of experts to come up. And I'll hand the microphone over to Daniel Rodriguez from our Department of City and Regional Planning, because as you can tell already, there are some really interesting connections between the speakers that we've heard from so far. So just as a reminder, yes, everyone's dutifully turning on your lavaliers, and yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Carol, and good evening, everyone. I want to thank the speakers for their great presentations. That was very enlightening. And one of the stories that I drew from the presentations was really the power of human beings to transform the landscape, and how that power has been increasing over time to the extreme of Dubai. And I wanted to ask Matthew and Cor here, whether you think their examples are replicable, and to what extent are they replicable? And to Daniel here, whether he agrees with the interpretation, perhaps erroneous, that the lessons from his book present a fairly bleak prospect for environmental sustainability. Partly, and being the devil's advocate here, but partly because if we look at Dubai, for example, or really the forces that are driving the adoption of these orange counties in different parts of the world are very hard to counter and really perhaps overcome just by those little reverse flows that are coming from Asia or from South America or from Africa to the US or to Europe. And are we stuck with the automobile? Are we really mimicking the trappings of prosperity? And with that, throwing our environment down the garbage?
Is it working? Okay. Well, I think that the first presentation gave a good idea that if you just put, we say, inventions or products or whatever defined for another area, and you put it in for instance, China or Africa or wherever, it's more like a standalone product. It doesn't attach to the country or attach to the culture of the people. And I think, you know, if you look at can we implement all the, can we develop towards a green and societal and good environment? Here, for instance, what is applicable from our knowledge in Europe or in wherever to this area, I think the techniques can always be implemented anywhere. But you have to do it with respect to the people and the culture that is existing. So it's actually, you know, I think you have to really be aware of what the people will accept and what not, and how you can attach it to their behavior, to their patterns, the cultural patterns, to everything that is in any social area different. I think it even counts within countries. So not only between countries, but also between certain areas in countries. So I think, you know, the techniques are there, and let's try to implement it to areas like here, with respect to what the tradition and the culture is here.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've dealt with that with a number of things that we've done. The Smallfest, for example, Startup Stampede, where, you know, Rocky Mount, for an example, in eastern North Carolina, you know, it's a small city. They're like, we want to do a startup stampede. We're like, great, meet with the entrepreneurs. How many entrepreneurs do you have? How many you've met with? They have, well, we have one startup. I'm like, well, that's not really what, you know, you're not able to just drop these things in these communities. So, you know, I think taking that time, which is what we did, I think, when we started the organization, figuring out what your strengths are, I think that's really key. And I don't know if a lot of communities do that. Like, oh, this is a cool idea, let's just do it. And so whether it's building or whether it's events or whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. Where it's not going to work in every place, and I think it makes it challenging. I think communities, when they need to be innovative too. I think that really hurts when you're trying to copy different things. So you have to kind of make it your own. So you need to be innovative and keep driving that innovation.
When I think about the four cities I focused on, I always think about the LEED, LEED, the LEED standards for green architecture, and one section is sustainable site. And none of these cities would get the sustainable site points. St. Petersburg is a flood-prone delta. Dubai is a desert. Mumbai is actually, it's actually an island it's a man-made island, essentially. It was an archipelago that was built into an island and still floods exactly where the old islands used to be. And Shanghai is kind of built on the mud at the end of a river along which 1/10 of the human population lives. That said, Amsterdam would not get sustainable site points either, and it's come up with some of the most innovative green technologies in the world. So think about both sides. With developments like Orange County, China, they're not a hopeful development, but they're not as bad as we think they may be. They represent a very, very small portion of Chinese urbanism. Actually, when you're in that development, it's much denser than actual Orange County, California. The houses are much closer together. And more typical development in urban China are mid-rise apartment buildings, and they're laid out very sensibly, and they put in subway lines and bus lines and parks and all of that. So I think the scale of the Asian city, just the population, makes it impossible to build the kind of sprawl that you see in most of the United States. Whether we sort of learn that lesson the easy way or the hard way is the open question. Whether we have to get to the sort of the breaking point before we learn, or we see it coming and build better. That's the question, and that's a question. Here, of course, it's not Asian megalopolitan scale, but I mean, your traffic is pretty intense. I was quite surprised by it, and it brings it back to the local. Is it going to be gridlock at 3:30 p.m. before? You're going to go with the easy way, or you're going to go the hard way?
So one of the interesting things when I was in Doha last year, I guess where Dubai was 25 years ago, they're just building stuff, right? Over there, you don't need, here you need to have tenants, anchor tenants when you build a building. They should just build them. They have so much money, oil money. They just build these buildings. And we went over to the main city, and if you Google some pictures of Doha, it's really a spectacular skyline. They've got all these great skyscrapers. We went into that district at night, nothing. I mean, there's nothing. All the buildings are like 5% occupied because they can build them and they can wait for it to happen. The World Cup's going to be there in 2018, 2020, I don't know what it is. But they're just building this. It's amazing what they're able to do and build. I don't know if it's good. It doesn't seem good when we were there, but maybe when they're able to fill them. But the government kind of writes, kind of signs to say, yeah, you can go ahead and build this, and we'll, anchor it with the 5% or 10% you need to build it. And then they just have all these buildings that are sitting empty right now. So they're kind of betting on the come and building stuff, which is we couldn't get away with any of that here. But it's really interesting to see the way that development is happening there when they have so much money. They just start building. Whether they're sustainable, whether it's going to work, I just don't know. But it'd be interesting to watch.
One tension that came up recurrently in your presentations was how to think about change. And is it top-down, sort of revolutionary? I have a vision, and this is how it's going to happen, and the four cities have an element of that, or whether it's bottom-up. And you all had slightly different takes. Matthew, you mentioned, for example, some issues that were put up to the voters, they would not have passed. And so that would have been a bad idea, right? And Cor was saying, well, we really have to meet somewhere in the middle. I wonder what's the role of human agency, not the individuals, not the visionaries, but everyone else in between. The businesses, the incubators, the innovators, the planners, the public administrators, everyone that is kind of trying to mediate these two extremes.
Well, we've taken a common sense approach, I think, to it. Daniel asked if Bill, who was my boss before and was the president for 20 years, whether he was a planner, whether he had gone through planning school. He had no training like that. I've never had any training in economic development or anything. I didn't go to school for that. It's more of, this, you look outside and the bricks are screwed up on the street and we'll fix them. It's almost been like that kind of thing. We see challenges And you have to pull together so many partnerships and have relationships with so many people. So when we got the ballpark and American Tobacco, whatever it was, done, any project, you have to, one, sell it to, you really have to sell it to the people who are voting. So you've got 7 city council members right now, you need 4 votes. That's how we approach a lot of these things. We research the heck out of things to make sure that we think they're going to work. Like, we're not going to propose anything that we think is going to be a bad deal for the Durham taxpayers. But a lot of times you're taking a chance. But it's pulling together. See, in Durham we have county and city government that we both need to kind of sign off on a lot of these things. So with American Tobacco, for instance, a city built one parking deck for $20 million. County built another for $24 million. And we're the ones who kind of pull those parties together. And inevitably they go this way. And we have to sit them down in a room and say, look, this is what we're doing. And we have to kind of bring them back together and make sure they understand what the kind of the bigger goal is in this. So it's city, county, it's EDI, it's the Durham Chamber, and then it's the citizens. Sometimes they're going to be for stuff, sometimes they're not, and sometimes you just have to convince the city council. So we've got a really strong. When we're recruiting a company or when we're doing these deals, we all behind closed doors. We don't necessarily agree, but we really present very well as a team. So people see us as a cohesive unit. All the organizations that are working on things. And so that's how we present. So we've been able to get a lot of things done. And then when you're successful with one, people start to trust you, and you have to build that trust over a number of years. But it's gone well for us with the different agencies that we've been able to leverage and work with. So, and the businesses now, we have really good relationships with them. So going out and getting support for things is a lot easier than it was 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think in my book, my research, I'm interested in the interplay between the top-down and the bottom-up. I mean, all of the cities start with this huge top-down element, but they all come into their own when there's a kind of bottom-up push. So, for example, in Shanghai, there's this massive expressway that was built in the 90s, actually going along the route that used to be a creek and used to be the boundary of the French and the British colonies. And some of the most interesting retail, some of the great hole-in-the-wall restaurants and weird little shops are underneath the expressway. And it's just it's the kind of thing the planning commissar who took out his pen and there's going to be a giant elevated freeway here. Never thought for a moment about what, if anything, would develop underneath this expressway. So there's some faith in just humans being amazing creatures. At the same time, all of these cities became major world cities because someone decided, had the sort of audacious thought that they would. And I don't want to totally lose that. And I think we need to appreciate, the story he told it's preposterous. That boarded up downtown in the mid-90s decided it was going to compete with Silicon Valley for tech companies? What? It's preposterous. And now, it's being recognized as legitimately competing with Silicon Valley for tech companies. So you do need that sort of crazy like a fox element.
I think one of the things that you note is some of the rules and regulations, and this goes back to what Daniel. He had a slide of Paris and New York, the outdoor seating. Have you guys been to the bathroom in here? The signs say don't drink the toilet water because it's reused water. Really? You really have to put that sign up. We dealt with that with a company in downtown. They redeveloped a building. They had to dye their water blue because it was reused water, and they had to put signs up that said, don't drink the toilet water. It goes back to that. We can't, in downtown, have seating against a building and serve alcohol, and then across the sidewalk, if there's a big sidewalk, you can't have pedestrians walk in between where tables would be and serve alcohol on these tables out here. You can't have a sidewalk in between. It doesn't make any sense. It's like over-regulating let people do. You don't have to let them do everything. Obviously, you have to have laws. But you look in Paris, and it's wonderful and fantastic. And then we're having trouble just getting 4 tables outside as opposed to cramming everybody in a place that makes the sidewalk more vibrant. Those are the things. It's like, gosh, these top-down kind of these regulations that have been put in place. We couldn't even do the signage that we're doing 5 or 6 years ago. It's like, why do we have all these regulations that are detrimental to what you're trying to do as a community? So, I think, we work a lot, way too much on trying to get those regulations changed and overturned with the city, since we're not a city governmental agency, that we kind of, discuss how do we fix these things that are just, they're stupid. Toilet water.
And in the Netherlands, I think it was a highly planned society. You know, the government and bigger companies planned our society. And the last 5-6 years, the governments have transferred into a more directive way of looking at things, and that all the initiatives come from the bottom. So they now are not planning anything anymore. They just have a role as a director. That's more the thing that is now in place.
It's a very, very interesting model.
Yeah.
Sort of merging both functions, the top down and the bottom up.
It's a learning process.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
When I was touring Daniel around today with the cool area where Full Steam Brewery is, a motor co music hall, those cool things, you know, that's more of that kind of, you know, they're kind of more grassroots. Where at American Tobacco now we had a Moe's and a Witch Witch, so those are our first real chains in downtown. So it's really a difference of, which is the cooler place that people really want to go to. If they come to Deep, they're going to go up to Motorco and Full Steam and in that area. So it's interesting, the grassroots versus the kind of more top-down approach.
Yeah, and I wonder whether Dan's critique of New York City was more a critique of trying to resolve this issue of bottom-up versus top-down. Because my understanding was, well, how do we change Times Square, and let's do it incrementally and slowly. So let's use cheap paint and cheap furniture and see whether people react too bad, because if they react too bad, we kind of backpedal. But if they kind of like it and there's we see support, then maybe later we'll do the improvements. But there's a lot of work to be done because it's clearly...
Yeah, and interestingly enough, Mayor Bloomberg's most audacious and I think smartest and sort of most essentially New York initiative was to do the congestion pricing in Manhattan, and that was the one that got away. That was the big failure. So yeah, I'm really more sympathetic to that big kind of thinking than this little, you know, Copenhagen on the Hudson River idea.
If there was one lesson you would want to give, say the state of North Carolina, about how to help the cities be more sustainable, both sort of economically, socially, and environmentally. We are kind of in the dark. We're searching in the dark for answers. Jobs are prominent, but I believe that it's not the only thing that we should be after. In your experience, what would that be?
I think this area in particular has a lot of opportunities to become very prominent in the sustainable area. Has major companies that are also European companies that are developing a lot of new techniques in the sustainable world. I think the situation between Durham and Raleigh and Chapel Hill, which are, you know, very different places when you look at the identity, could be really a breeding ground for new techniques, but also applying the techniques towards becoming a more sustainable area. It's got really nice universities with a lot of knowledge. It's got all kinds of international alliances. I think this area is a very interesting area that can really be an outstanding place, and it's also competing with Silicon Valley, for instance. It is also a very competitive area. If techniques here are developing more rapidly, you attract more companies like ABB and whatever. This can be a Silicon Valley for the sustainable world.
But in contrast to the Netherlands, we're in a case in which the state doesn't play a big role, either directing, in some cases it's more like an obstacle. It sounds like the third way that we might reinvent here is how to do it without a strong central role, and maybe thinking about the cities and the individuals that might harness that innovation.
I think you have to put infrastructure type stuff. I think that's the role of government or organizations like ours, is create that environment that people can be successful. So transit, I mean, God, transit is going to be a huge problem in 20 or 30 years. 10 years is probably going to be a huge problem. So I think that's the key. I know we passed the half-cent sales tax for the commuter rail, so is Chapel Hill. Raleigh hasn't put it on the ballot yet. So things like, obviously there are cities, but I think this just over the entire state. We have to really, I think, start thinking a little more forward, I think, about things like that, about the infrastructure that we put in place for businesses to make it. I mean, and there's so many different things. You know, one of the things that's challenging for us is the Amendment 1, which is the gay marriage thing. I mean, that's really hurt us to be able to recruit businesses, for us to not allow that here. I mean, that's a big deal for Durham anyway. You know, is that we, you know, it really hurts for the communities that we have in our areas. It hurts to recruit companies when you don't have, you know, the same, you know, kind of forward thinking that a lot of other states, or at least moving towards. So, you know, transit and things like that. I mean, it's just things that I think we as a state just need to be a little more progressive, just generally in our views of society and the way things are moving forward. Because it's going to happen a lot faster. The growth is going to happen a lot faster than I think people realize. Like, you can hear the numbers of, you know, we're going to triple our growth in the triangle, whatever, over the next 20 years. Hearing those numbers doesn't translate necessarily into actually doing something about it.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Let's now transition to having some questions from the audience. We have about, what, 15 minutes, Carolyn, for that? So if any of you have questions, feel free to just perhaps raise your hand and we'll bring the mic to you.
Hi. So if the soft infrastructure changes, such as copying the bike paths without building all the way to them, are, like, if you wouldn't recommend that, how would you recommend achieving an infrastructure change without the incremental steps to get there? Sorry, I forgot to direct that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm a cyclist in New Orleans. That was my primary manner of getting around. There's an incrementalism that's so incremental it's almost worse than nothing. And I would contrast two different types of incrementalism. On some streets, we have at least painted a divider between the traffic lane and the cycling lane, and that works as a bare minimum. You're not going to have any actual barrier or dedicated crossing or whatever. When you just make something a shared lane, now it might work in a liberal college town like Chapel Hill. I've noticed people sometimes stopping for jaywalkers even, but it's not gonna work in America's oil and gas heartland of Louisiana. So I think, yeah, I would say as a bare minimum, you want to have a dedicated lane, and then work up from there. I think it's fine to start there.
I have a question for Mr. Durham.
It's funny, my boss's name is Jeff Durham, the guy that hired my boss. This is actually.
I think Durham definitely has an incredible vibe. I am wondering how you have incorporated the other half of Durham into your plans. The, let's say, not so wealthy part. And I'm not saying this as a criticism. I'm really interested in how you get that part of the city also in the upswing.
Right. One, so when we started, downtown was completely empty. So one of the things that normally happens in cities when you have this kind of gentrification, is people moving in, is you push people out of your downtown. We didn't have that because there was just nobody really there to begin with. So luckily we didn't have that. So what we've tried, it's a challenge. I mean, it's a huge challenge when you're talking about housing, where, you know, the condos that we have now are selling for, you know, $300 a square foot. The apartments are, you know, $150 a square foot a month. I mean, they're starting to push some pretty high prices. especially for the triangle. So, you know, how do you keep affordable housing in downtown? We have virtually none in kind of the 12 by 16 blocks in downtown. How do you keep the restaurants, all the restaurants that we have, if you go to lunch, you're spending $8 to $10. You know, it's a challenge. And honestly, I don't think we've done a great job of that at this point. I think what we've tried to do is, one, jobs that we've tried to create, we want to have, you know, obviously we want to have good jobs where college-educated people are coming in and working, PhDs are working. We also have a lot of the startup companies and some other companies that are able to hire people that don't have, you know, college diplomas. They have high school education or GEDs. You know, I know it's one of the tech companies. They need kind of data entry and that kind of stuff, and one of their goals is to help hire those you know, people who are not college educated. And we have a number of companies that work with the kind of the prison release program to hire people back into the workforce. Like we have things like that. One of the good things is if you go to East Durham, up until like 3 years ago, you could still get houses for like $30,000 or $40,000, and you're still within walking distance of downtown. Now, a lot of those have been purchased, and a lot of those have been redeveloped, and the prices now there are starting to go up. The other thing we try and do is events are a big challenge too, because, you know, DPAC, $150 a ticket. You know, a lot of people can't afford to go to that, so we try and do a lot of free concerts, free classes. So we have free concerts on CCV Plaza. So kind of the cultural amenities that we have. We actually have a concert series we started last year on the Plaza. We're 13 free concerts on Thursday nights. Brightly Square does the same thing. American Tobacco does the same thing. So there are a lot of ways to get engaged and to do things. Whether or not, one, you're college educated for jobs, and two, whether or not you have a lot of money to go, you know, disposable income to go to the high-end restaurants that we have. You know, I think we're still working on trying to figure out how, if we give incentives to a project, that they incorporate some kind of affordable units in there. Working on like a 60 to 80% of median income, where a part of the project has to be in that range. And we don't want like affordable housing developments. Like you don't want that, because it turn into kind of project kind of areas. You want to have it where it's kind of incorporated. So you have a nurse who makes whatever she's making beside a a CEO of a company, or a teacher in the same building. The other thing, just east of kind of the main downtown in between Golden Belt, I don't know how familiar you are, but within our district is the Hope 6 project. So that's a home ownership opportunity for this the same type of deal where people can, that were in, kind of city housing and those type of things can actually move up into kind of home ownership, or the nicer buildings that were done, 7 or 8 years ago, and they actually have a nice place to stay. So we kind of work with groups to actually help foster those type of things. Obviously, we have partnerships with Urban Ministries and the Rescue Mission in Durham. So we refer people with any issues that are panhandling or need help. We refer them, our ambassadors refer them over to those places where they can get help. So we don't have it all figured out. I mean, that's, I'm not sure many communities do have it all figured out, but we are certainly making efforts to make sure we are as inclusive as we can be. That was a long answer. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you so much for being here. That's loud. I'm a current MBA student, and we are doing a sustainability capstone project, part of which is focused on Eastern North Carolina. You mentioned Rocky Mount is one community we're looking at. And one thing we've been talking about in looking at Eastern Carolina, which is very rural and has a lot of pretty economically depressed towns, very small towns, some of the communities we're working with, is this question of, are these small towns dying out? Is that, we've seen some images, is that the wave of the future? I would love to hear your thoughts on rural communities and rural towns, and if the wave of the future is not that they're going to disappear, what do you have thoughts about how they can be more vibrant and sustainable? That would be open to anyone, I guess. Thank you.
Maybe I can say something on that. Previously, the students showed their trip to Germany. And in Germany, legislation is like that, and one of the students mentioned it, that you can have your own energy. And if you have, as long as you have access to the network, and you get a feed-in tariff, you can actually make money. In Germany, you have also a lot of, we say, deprived little towns that were not so doing well anymore agriculturally. They're used to work in corporations, agricultural corporations, so they started corporations in energy. They put money together and they started energy plants, more or less, on the rooftops of the farming buildings, anywhere. And most of those villages or cities make money of it, and quite a lot. And they invest the money back into the community. So they invest, for instance, in a community house or a theater or a soccer stadium. All kinds of little things that, you know, makes the village more attractive to be settled there. Also for the young people, because they have about the same problem anywhere in Europe, by the way, the problem of young people leaving those areas and go to big cities. So that might be you know, something to think of.
You guys looking at Wilson? I'm curious, because didn't they put in the fiber internet a few years ago? I'm curious what, I don't know, I mean, what's happened with what effect that's had. Because they have faster internet, or have for the last 5 or 6 years, than anybody else in the state, really, as a community. So I'm curious what that does, especially with, you know, Google and we're doing this Gig U thing with Google Fiber, looking at other communities, and just, you know, obviously they want to spread their thing over. I'm from Goldsboro, so, you know, Eastern North Carolina, so we can talk afterwards. I'd love to kind of get involved in that in some way, shape, or form.
Well, I walk up there, I want to ask a question, kind of following up on Bridget's, related to urban versus rural. My background's as an environmental scientist, so from an environmentalist perspective, on the surface, urbanization is a bad thing. And so I was interested in, because you're converting green space to buildings, but it's not necessarily the case that cities are less green or less favorable for the environment than rural or sprawl or developments into rural areas. So could you talk a little bit about that, especially Daniel, Brook, your experience looking across the planet, and Cor, your experience in Europe?
Sure. Yeah, cities are incredibly efficient and should be incredibly green. Just a well-designed city treads lightly on the earth. I mean, one thing is reusing building materials, but I mean, just a poorly designed city is a disaster. I mean, the statistic that comes to mind is that the average resident of Tokyo uses as much energy in a week as the average resident of Houston uses in a day. So those are two extreme types of cities. But the more cities we can build like Tokyo, the more sustainable we'll all be.
Yeah, I think that you can see that in 2 ways. Concentrating people in cities leaves a lot of space for green development. In one hand, that might be attractive. It's kind of, or you say, settlement which you can manipulate better than when they're all rurally spread out. You can also have what you see a lot happening now is bringing green into the cities, like green rooftops, for instance. You see that is really developing a lot. At the other hand, I think people who grow up in the city don't have the how you say that the attachment with the rural areas and green areas around it. Somebody who grows up in a stone environment, and so the environmental link is less. And what you see is that, especially now with a lot of people in the cities, is that we actually explore the rest of the world really badly. We now tearing down a lot of rainforest, or for instance palm oil that is used in a lot of products that we use, because people in the city that they have no idea about what is happening. So the link between the green areas and people, the roots from the people is actually gone when So the two sides of it, it's more controllable and manipulated area when people are in the city. It's much more, condensed. At the other side, you also have the problem that the relationship between the people and the rest of the earth is getting looser.
Thank you.
So as cities incorporate technology to become smarter, there is this inherent tension between low-income residents and the folks who can actually afford to install this technology, like let's say renewable power or even basic insulation for their homes. Low-income folks have problems participating in that sort of thing. And more recently in their other economic issues, more recently in San Francisco, the tension between housing and technology. How can cities be more inclusive as they integrate technology into the daily processes, but still at the same time allow low-income folks to be able to participate as well?
I'll go because this kind of piggybacks on the question that you had. And I didn't mention that we have some really cool training programs that people are doing, like for sustainable development and taking their homes and making them, solar and that kind of stuff. And there's training programs to actually train the lower income population to do a lot of those jobs. So they actually are training to do that stuff. We're also starting this thing for startups or for the technology. If kids want to get involved in programming and that type of stuff, we're starting like these programs so they can actually get in and do that. So it'd be in some of the junior high schools in Durham, and if people are interested in that, kids are interested in that, they can actually get in programs that help them program so they can actually move into those technology type jobs when previously they don't have any of those training programs. So there's some really cool things that some people in Durham are doing to actually help those type of things. So that startup American Underground, they're working on those things right now. So it actually helps transition people into those jobs. We also have all these gaming companies out in RTP, and a lot of kids are interested in game development and those type of things. And so actually moving those into tracks in the schools that can actually help train them for those things, as opposed to just going through the generic, here's the stuff you need to learn about geography and whatever. You can actually get them involved and interested in things that can actually move them into technology and train them in some of these fields that can actually improve their knowledge and improve their job prospects when they get out.
I think this is one of the most important issues raised by cities here or the cities I've looked at abroad. But I also think that the city sort of puts the state of the society in kind of high relief. And while there are many policies that can be put in place at the city level, a lot of the things we're seeing in San Francisco or in Durham or in Shanghai are macro issues that really need to be addressed at a national level. As cities compete, if the rule is, America is going to tolerate an income distribution where only the top 1% ever gets a raise, then the cities are going to have to compete for wooing more of the top 1% to live in them, and the successful cities will do that, and the loser cities won't. But that's a big if. So things like, there are little things that cities can do. Certain cities have a higher minimum wage, just as a local ordinance. Those things are great. Do them. But at the same time, these issues are bigger than individual cities, and we really need to look in a broader way to address these issues.
I think that's the perfect comment. I think that's the perfect comment to end on, that we have big challenges ahead of us, but certainly with some innovation really modeled for us by Downtown Durham Inc. and some smart green cities in Europe, we have some good lessons we can draw from, and hopefully not just transport and plop down a solution, but make the necessary adaptations. So thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you, Daniel, for moderating, and thank you all for coming. We have the opportunity to buy History of Cities book, and invite you to stay for a little while with our closing reception. Thanks.